Hey everybody, this is Russ from Retro Game Core. Today we're going to talk about the Retroid Pocket Mini, and this is a long story, but essentially they have been sending out new screen replacements for this device, and I recently installed it on the two that I have, and I want to talk about this experience. And essentially these new devices have the Retroid Pocket Classic screen inside of them, and honestly it's been there this whole time, but now we actually have the full screen size. Like I said, there is a lot to talk about when it comes to these screens. Either way, let's just jump right into it. So let's start by talking about how we got here in the first place when it comes to the Retroid Pocket Mini, because it is a bit of a long story. The Retroid Pocket Mini first came out around September, October of last year, so it's been about 6 or 7 months. And when it first came out, there were a lot of things I liked about it. The fact that it was so small, but also quite powerful. This has the exact same Snapdragon 865 chip found in the Retroid Pocket 5 and the Retroid Pocket Flip 2. However, there were quite a few things I didn't really like about the Retroid Pocket Mini. Number one was the screen to body aspect ratio. I felt like the screen itself was just a little bit too small. In addition, it had some pretty big bezels around the screen, which made it look a little bit weird. And when all was said and done, I ended up not really using the Retroid Pocket Mini that much, mostly because I just preferred to play on the Retroid Pocket 5. In fact, in my favorite handhelds video of 2024, I labeled the Retroid Pocket Mini as my favorite disappointment of the year. I could definitely see how some people would enjoy it, but I had found that it just kind of rested on a shelf for me in lieu of other handhelds that I really enjoyed more. Now, after the Retroid Pocket Mini released, there were some community members who figured out that there was some sort of scaling issue happening with this screen. I made a video about this already. Essentially, the device was reporting a 1280 by 960 resolution, but when using scaling to that resolution, something was off. Now, initially, Retroid said that it was a firmware issue. They were going to go back to the factory who had made these screens and see what they could figure out. However, after about 4 months of back and forth about that, they admitted that they couldn't find a fix for it, and so they tried to come up with some sort of solution for current users. And so that was part of the video that I had made a couple months ago about this screen issue, where I showed exactly what was happening and then some of the mitigations that I had found to make it at least look a little bit better. Now, Retroid's response to this whole thing was pretty bad. They had said that, Retroid Pocket Mini users who were affected by the scaling issue could return their devices for reimbursement, but they added just a bunch of other caveats to it. They had a return window, which is kind of par for the course with a lot of these returns, but they made it super short. It was only like a week when it should have really been like 2 or 3. But then on top of that, they also limited it to 200 units returned, and then some other stuff, like they had to pay for return shipping, and then accessories weren't included as well. Now, that whole thing blew up. It was a very exciting time in the community a couple months ago, but since then they have kind of taken back all that stuff, and so they allowed basically everybody to return those that they wanted to, and so that was basically how they had left it. They also said that they were going to work on a brand new screen for the Retroid Pocket Mini, like a version 2 as well, and so I'm not really sure what's going on with that. I haven't heard any updates since then. I don't really talk to Retroid other than just to communicate review unit shipping and stuff like that. And so that's where we were up until about a month and a half ago. But then somebody in the community figured out that something was up with this screen. It wasn't just the scaling and firmware issue that Retroid had been talking about. And what they had figured out was that the screen on the Retroid Pocket Mini was the exact same screen on the iNeo Pocket DMG, as well as on the upcoming Retroid Pocket Classic, which has now been released. This one has a 31 by 27 aspect ratio, but a resolution of 1240 by 1080. And as a reminder, the Retroid Pocket Mini, I've only got a shell at this point, the original resolution on this was supposed to be 1280 by 960. And so the operative thing here is that they said it was 1280 across, whereas these screens are 1240 across. And that same community member actually took apart their Retroid Pocket Mini and verified that yes, it is the actual same screen, and that there's a bezel right here that's covering up the other stuff to make it 4:3. And so even though Retroid never really confirmed it, I think this is why we were seeing the scaling issue on the Retroid Pocket Mini, because this resolution is only 1240 across, not 1280 like they were saying. And I think they were doing something in the software or firmware, something in the driver level that was basically making it report as 1280 by 960 when it only had 1240 pixels across. And so that was what was causing this scaling issue and making all the shaders look weird, and even things like GameCube and PS2 looked off as well. And so that's the going consensus right now, is that the 4:3 screen on the Retroid Pocket Mini was created from a different screen, and then they covered up some of the bezels and they just kind of faked it, and then the community figured it out and it became a whole debacle. And lo and behold, after all that stuff came out, Retroid made another announcement. They said, okay, For all the Retroid Pocket Mini customers, if you would like, we will send you a new screen on the front that will have this new Retroid Pocket Classic aspect ratio. So essentially they were saying, okay, we'll give you that screen back and we'll remove these bezels instead. And so that's what this guy is right here. I've gone through and done my replacement on it already. And yeah, now I have the exact same screen as the Retroid Pocket Classic and the Neo DMG, but in the Retroid Pocket Mini. And I gotta say, it looks amazing. Look at this screen to body ratio. You know, it just makes it a lot more fitting, and I love the way it fills out the entire device. And so this already looks a lot better. In addition, we've got a ton of stuff that we can do with this aspect ratio and resolution, and I'll talk about that later in this video. And so that's how we got here in the first place. The Retroid Pocket Mini had all sorts of weird screen issues that were admittedly pretty subtle, but still very weird. And then also we now have this screen replacement option too. And as far as the return process of getting a new screen, what you have to do is email Retroid and then let them know your order number, and then they will send you the screen replacement for free. It's going to include the back and the front shells, but limited to the black color only. One thing worth noting is you have to flash Android 13 onto your Retroid Pocket Mini as part of this process and using this screen, which means it's going to wipe your internal storage. So you will have to reset up your device, something to think about. And so in the next part in this video, I want to talk about that screen replacement process. It's not going to be a full-on guide. Retroid actually has their own video guides, and they're actually pretty good. That's what I followed, but there were some pain points to it. And so that's what I want to talk about in this video, specifically if you plan on doing that and some of the things to look out for. To start, let's talk about the tools. So obviously you're going to need the replacement shell in your old Retroid Pocket Mini. In addition, you're only going to need one screwdriver. It needs to be 00 size. The kit will come with a screwdriver, but I would say that it's not very good quality, so I would use your own. I also would recommend some tweezers. This is going to be just for a couple fine-tuned things that might make it a little bit easier. And then finally, a plastic spudger always comes in handy as well, in case you have bigger fingers. Another thing I would recommend is an X-Acto knife. This is only for one specific part of the build, but it is definitely a lifesaver in that regard. And that's because we have to remove a very finicky ribbon cable, and another thing I would recommend doing is using a hairdryer to help as well. Now, you don't necessarily have to borrow a Hello Kitty hairdryer from your wife, but it might help. Another thing I would recommend is a couple little dishes, and that's because there are different size screws, and they don't really talk about that in the Retroid guide. For the most part, all of the screws are the same, so you can throw them all together except for the heatsink, speakers, as well as fan. Now, opening up the Retroid Pocket Mini can be a little bit tricky because it is very tightly shut. I recommend using 2 guitar picks and one that's more sturdy, like the white one that comes with your kit. They recommend going from the top, but I've always found that it works better from the bottom, from the microSD card slot. So I like to put it directly in this slot and then twist it a little bit so that it pries open one of the sides. Once I have it slightly opened, I use the other guitar pick or a fingernail to go around the edges. Once you've got one side done, then you can go around and go on the other side, and from there you should have the whole bottom section undone. After that, it's a lot easier to take off the top section, which is going to be very tight. And so same thing here, just kind of wedge it open and then go across. And from there, you can just take off the back shell. There's no connections to it, but make sure that you grab the volume up and down and power buttons, which are going to be attached to your back shell. You'll need these later. Now, the first thing worth noting is that getting off the trigger buttons can be a little bit tricky. And I found the best way to do it is to think about pulling them up as opposed to out. So really it just takes a little bit of force up and then they will pop right out, and there you go. Now, like I mentioned, this is not going to be a full tutorial just because I think the Retroid video does a pretty good job, so really just follow their video and go in the specific order that they annotate. Once you've got a bunch of these components off, the next pain point for me was the mylar covering over the fan. And that's because this material is very fragile, and on one of my Retroid Pocket Minis, I actually ripped this part. Now, it doesn't really matter if you rip it, but I would just recommend being very careful right here and just kind of slowly pry it open. It is going to be sticky on one side, so just pay attention to that part, and that's really about it. Another pain point is the power cable to the fan itself because it's wedged in there and the connector itself is relatively thin. So be very careful when taking this one in and out, but it's not too hard. And like I mentioned, the speakers, fan, and heatsink all have different size screws, so I do recommend putting those in different little containers. Anyway, once you have the fan off, you'll have to take the heatsink off and be a little bit careful about this one as well because it does have thermal paste. And then finally from there, you'll need to remove the battery and then all the ribbon cables and then the motherboard itself. Okay, so the biggest pain points of this whole build are these ribbon cables up above. These are stuck to the shell itself. You have to pry them off without ripping the ribbon cable. The shoulder button ones are actually pretty easy, no big deal there, but that middle one is a pain in the butt. In fact, the first time around, I broke this middle ribbon cable, and it delayed making this video by about a week because of it. And if you do happen to break yours like I did, they said to just email them and they'll send you a new one out. Regardless, the way that we're going to get these off is we're going to heat them up with a hairdryer that's going to loosen up the glue and make it easier to separate. And then we'll also use our X-Acto knife on this middle one to make sure that we get it off. It doesn't take a lot of heat to loosen it up. I'm just using the low setting on my hairdryer and I did it for about 3 or 4 minutes and that was plenty. It is definitely going to get very warm, so make sure you don't burn your fingers. Anyway, once you've got it loosened up, I would recommend starting with these shoulder buttons so you get a feel for it, and I would just immediately transfer it over to the new shell right then and there. Thankfully, there are little grooves for each of them, so it is pretty easy, especially for the shoulder buttons. Now, I was a little bit nervous after breaking mine, so I reheated my middle ribbon cable again after doing these shoulder ribbon cables just to make sure it was as hot as possible. And then after that, I got my X-Acto knife and I went under the ribbon cable, which has a tiny piece of metal underneath, and I separated the metal from the plastic of the shell itself. And we're not cutting anything here other than just kind of taking the knife through the glue to loosen it up. Either way, once I had gone through that, it was much easier to pry this off, and then, of course, I just transferred it directly onto the new shell from there. And like I mentioned, this is definitely the hardest thing that you can do in this entire build. It really moves it from being an intermediate job to something that I would consider to be a bit more advanced. Now, thankfully, it's all downhill from there because putting it all back together is a lot easier than taking it apart. And so I would recommend watching that Retroid video because they do a pretty good job spelling out every step. The only tricky part for me was putting the trigger buttons back on, and again, I recommend doing it from the top down. Anyway, that's about it when it comes to the shell swap, but this is not for the faint of heart. I would say you need some electronics experience in order to dive into this. Now, like I mentioned before, you are going to have to flash Android 13 onto this device, and Retroid's got a video for that too, but it's not very good. So I'm actually going to walk you through that step by step. Thankfully, it is very easy. If you try to start up the device on its own, it will actually boot up, but you can see that you can't really see anything. And that's because, something with the panel is off. And so that's why we need to flash it. There are 2 links that I'll have in the video description that are going to be to Google Drive. These are provided by Retroid, and these are going to be the files that we need. The first one is going to be the Android 13 image files. And so this one, you just want to click and then select download. These files are so big that it's actually going to compact them into 3 different zip files. So you have to download all 3. Now, the other Google Drive link is going to be to their Android 13 build, but for the original Retroid Pocket Mini, but this has some software that we actually need as well. There are 2 that we need in particular. There's one called QPST. This is going to be a zip file, and this essentially is going to be the software that we're going to use to flash Android 13. In addition, there's going to be Qualcomm drivers, so this is what we need in order to allow the Retroid Pocket Mini to interact with our computer. And it is also worth noting that this whole process requires a Windows PC, so you're not able to do this on Mac or Linux. Anyway, once you're done downloading, you should have 5 different files. 3 of them will be the Android build, 1 will be the drivers, and then 1 will be the software package itself. Let's start with the drivers. These are going to be an executable file, so you just have to double click on them and then go through the prompts. This will install the drivers. It only takes a minute. After that, let's install the software package. That's going to be that single zip file. I'd recommend using 7-zip on your Windows computer to open this up, and that'll allow you to actually browse the files. From there, go to extract, and then it's going to ask you what folder you want to extract it into. I would recommend making a new folder instead. You can name this folder whatever you would like. I'm going to name mine QPST. Now, once you've extracted that folder, go inside of it and you will find a bunch of files, and one of them will be an application file. We're going to double click and open this one. This one is called Qualcomm Setup, and this is just a standard installation as well. This is going to be the software package that we need to flash Android 13. Once you've gone through all those prompts and had it installed, we are good to go. Now we just need to unzip our Android 13 package. So back in this main folder, let's just pick the first zip file, open it up with 7-zip, and then just click on that extract button. It's going to make a folder for you right here. So all you have to do is just press OK. And even though we have 3 different zip files, they're actually all going to extract into that same folder as well. So once you're done extracting one of those files, just do the same process for the next one. Again, you'll just press the extract button. It'll extract into that folder, and we want to put these all into the same place. So this is all great. And then finally do it for that 3rd file, and then we should be good to go. We should have all the files that we need. Now, because we installed drivers, my recommendation would be to go and actually restart your Windows. Every time I install drivers, I always restart my machine just to make sure they're all working properly. Once we've done that, we are ready to flash the Android build. So first thing you want to do is go into your Windows Start menu. On the top right of all the apps, you'll see a button that says All. Click on that. It's going to give you a list of all the apps installed on your machine. And you want to scroll down until the Q section and find one that's called QPST. And then within that, you will find an app called QSIL. So that's what we want to open up. This is the software we're going to use to flash Android 13. Once we're in the app, we want to go up to the top tabs and pick the one that says configuration, and then underneath it'll say fire hose configuration. Click on that. Now on the left side under device type, you want to change this from eMMC to UFS. After you've done that, hit the Yeah Man I want to do it button. That'll take you back to the front page. Now under select build type, click on the one that says flat build. And now we just need to point to some certain files. So on the top one that says browse, click on that. And once that Explorer window opens up, you want to navigate to that folder that we had unzipped before that had the Android 13 build. Once you drill down into that folder, you will find a file that says Firehose. We just want to click on that. Now further down, there's a button that says Load XML. Click on that. It's going to take you exactly back to that same folder. And right off the bat, you're going to see a bunch of files that are already contained within them. So all we have to do is just select all of these files, and that'll be good. Once you've selected these files and hit open, you will see another window pop up that will have more files there. So you just again want to select all of these and hit open again. And so now we're ready to do the actual flashing, and this is a little bit tricky. You have to press the volume up, volume down, and power button all at the same time and hold them. And it's very easy to let one of your fingers off, and so make sure that you're holding them pretty tightly. Once you've got all three buttons pushed, you want to connect a USB cable from your computer to the machine. And on the top, it's going to go from saying no port available to select existing port. From there, click on the select port on the top right, and you should see your Retroid Pocket Mini right there. So now just hit OK, and then there's a blue button near the right side that says download. Press that. As soon as you press that download button, you want to let go of all three buttons at once. And down below in the app, you will see a status window, and it'll start showing a bunch of stuff happening. It'll let you know if there's an error, but if there isn't any error, it's just going to go through and now flash Android 13 to it. I'm going to fast forward here just because it takes about 5 to 10 minutes, but yeah, kick back, grab a snack and drink, and just enjoy the process. Now, theoretically, it's supposed to restart your device once it's finished, but I found that mine did not restart, and so instead, I just unplugged it and then manually started it myself. I did have to hold onto the power button for quite a bit, maybe like 10 seconds altogether, but after that, it did boot up. And sure enough, I got the Retroid Pocket boot logo, and then it was greeted with a welcome screen. Now, curiously enough, it says Retroid Pocket Mini version 2, so I don't know if they're making a version 2, but this kind of indicates that maybe they are. Either way, from there, you just want to do your initial setup process like you would with any other Retroid product. Now, once you get into the main Android menu, it is going to give you a prompt to recalibrate your joystick, so let's go in and do that. And this is very easy, just tap on the little calibration button, and then it'll walk you through all the directions you need to move into, and then you'll have to spin the controller for a moment, and really that's about it. Just do that for both sticks. And while you're in there, just go ahead and calibrate your analog triggers as well, and that's really about it. I would recommend restarting your device after doing this calibration just to make sure that they stick. But other than that, you are now ready to go. You've got a brand new Retroid Pocket Mini with a new screen, and you just have to set everything up. And of course, I've got starter guides for all that stuff as well. I'll leave one link down below. Okay, so let's take a look at my new Retroid Pocket Minis. Now, this one originally was the gray model, as you can see right here. This was the defect one where they accidentally made it dark gray when it was supposed to be white, I believe. And so they were calling this one the Half-Life model for a while. And so that's what this orange one is right here. Now this one up here was my Sega Saturn model, so it had different colored buttons and purple shoulder buttons, but I had bought a bunch of buttons myself a few months back, and so I decided to kind of mix it up, and so I used Super Nintendo European buttons right here, and then I went all black here with the shoulder buttons, and then I used the original gray for the D-pad as well as the analog sticks, and so that's why we have a bit of a mix and match, but I really like the look of this one. I think I like this one a little bit better than this. I like that it's orange, I think it's pretty unique, but I kind of wish that these function buttons were black as well. I think it would just flow a little bit better. So between the two, I definitely prefer this one, but I actually spent a couple hours setting this one up, and so this is going to be our example device. So first question is, how does it look compared to the other one? And I think it is a night and day difference, as you can see. I mean, we had these big old bezels at the top and bottom, and now they are much thinner, and I think it's a lot more impressive. So personally, I'm a big fan of this new change. I like that it's a lot bigger now, and I really like this screen anyway. I don't mind that it's not a 4x3 because it gives us more options to work with. Essentially what we're looking at now is a horizontal version of the Retroid Pocket Classic, but also with analog sticks, which just gives you a lot more control. In addition, this one has the Snapdragon 865, so a lot more powerful as well, so it does give us more room to work with. Now, I spent a lot of time talking about all the great things you can do with this screen, both in my iNeo DMG review, but then also my Retroid Pocket Classic video, so I'll just give a quick overview right now. When it comes to these squarer systems like Game Boy and Game Boy Color, I think it looks amazing. So what I'm doing right here is I'm blowing it up to full screen, and then I'm using a Pixel AA shader underneath that helps to balance out all of the pixels, and then I'm using an LCD 3X shader on top of that. So we've got a perfectly balanced screen with a LCD grid effect, and then also some nice colorization as well. So this is a really cool horizontal way to play Game Boy games. And it's the same story with the Game Boy Color. You can see here it's filled out the entire screen, but still looks very good. It's very close to 10 by 9. And yeah, I'm using that LCD grid shader as well. When it comes to Nintendo and Super Nintendo, I also like to use a full screen display. So it's kind of close to an 8 by 7 at this point. And so it's not going to be a true 4:3, but I think it still looks very good. What I'm doing here is blowing it up to full screen, even though it is very close to being integer scaled. I just use instead a CRT shader, which balances everything out anyway. And because we have the Snapdragon 865, I'm using a CRT Royale fast shader. You can still use the heavy-duty CRT Royale shaders too, but I like the fact that this one is very lightweight, which allows me to play in just the standard mode and have a lot longer battery life. So this is one of my favorite ways to play, my home console systems like Nintendo, Super Nintendo, TurboGrafx-16. Here's another example with Super Nintendo. So this is Mega Man X right here. So I am running this in full screen, non-integer scaled, but using that CRT Royale fast shader. And this allows me to have balanced pixels, as you can see with Mega Man's life bar, but it still looks very, very good. Another thing I've been doing, even with 4:3 systems like GameCube and PS2, is blowing them up to full screen, just because, I don't know, it just fills up so much that I really like it. Yes, it makes the characters a little bit taller, but I think that's something I'm willing to live with. Now, there are ways to use widescreen hacks to make it taller instead of wider, and so there are other options that you can do if you really want to get into the weeds with 4:3 systems. But for me personally, I found that just kind of using it like this and just blowing it up a little bit has been a really nice experience, all things considered. And so this might be the way that I play PS2 and GameCube on this machine. It's definitely not proper, and it might land me in jail with the aspect ratio police, but personally, I think it's actually pretty great. The only annoyance I've found so far with this device is that this SD card slot does not like to stay in place. Sometimes it just pops out for no reason, and so you have to really perfectly put it into place to keep it there. And so this is something that's a little bit annoying, and if they do make an update to this device, I hope they fix it. Either way, I'm very happy with this Retroid Pocket Mini. I love the fact that we've got a bigger screen. It just looks a lot more professional now because the screen takes up so much more real estate. The other one just looked a little bit stunted because of those bezels on the top and bottom, and so I really like just the look of this handheld now. My hope is that Retroid releases a version 2 of the Retroid Pocket Mini with this screen, and that includes, things like color options, because I don't like the fact that only black models are available right now. So I'd love to see, white models or like an indigo model. All that stuff would be really cool. It's kind of like a smaller version of the Retroid Pocket 5 at that point. Another thing I'd really like to see are 2 different models of the Retroid Pocket Mini. We could have the Snapdragon 865 version, basically exactly like the original model, but with the bigger screen, and for the same price, around $200. But I really like the chip on the Retroid Pocket Classic as well, because even though it's not super powerful, it is very cheap and works well for emulation. And so I'd also like to see a budget version of the Retroid Pocket Mini, maybe selling for about $150. I think that's fair considering that this is $130. So that's what I'd like to see, is an updated version of the Retroid Pocket Mini, an actual version 2 with multiple color options, and the Snapdragon 865 for around $200, and then also the Snapdragon G1 Gen 2 found in the Retroid Pocket Classic, but in a cheaper model for around $150. I think that would be an excellent mix. So my big takeaways from this whole fiasco is that they should have gone with this screen from the get-go. I'm not really sure why they went with the 4:3 model instead. My guess is they just assumed that retro gamers liked 4:3, but the lesson learned from this is that you want to give us as much screen and as much resolution as possible and let the community take care of the rest, because we just need the pixels. We'll make it work. The idea of cutting off pixels in order to keep a specific aspect ratio just doesn't make sense to me as somebody who likes to tinker and find out how things work. There are so many other systems besides 4:3 that I don't think we should be limited to just 4:3 and 16:9. There are other aspect ratios that are great, 3:2, 5:3, all those really work well too. So in the end, I am very happy with the Retroid Pocket Mini. I will probably still play my Retroid Pocket Flip 2 more. I mean, this thing is always around, but it is cool that we have a really small handheld now that has a much more impressive screen. So let me know what you think in the comments down below. I'm glad that Retroid eventually got here now, but I think there's more that they could do. Release a new version of this device with more color options, and I bet it will sell pretty well. As always, thank you for watching. Be sure to like and subscribe if you found this helpful, and we will see you next time. Happy gaming.